He asked what I was asking then. I didn't have an answer that didn't sound crazy. He left without kissing me goodbye. I couldn't sleep that night replaying the fight in my head. The next morning, I texted Luke saying I was sorry and asking if we could talk. He came over while Mia was at work. We sat on opposite ends of the couch where this whole thing started. I apologized for making him feel like he had to choose. He nodded but didn't say anything right away. I admitted the fight showed me something ugly about myself. I told him I wanted him to pick me over Mia completely, and that wasn't realistic or fair. He leaned forward with his elbows on his knees. He said he needed me to trust that what he felt for Mia was about an idea he built up in his head. He explained that the real friendship they had was different from the romantic fantasy he'd been chasing. I asked how I was supposed to know the difference. He looked at me and said because he chose to be here right now instead of avoiding the hard conversation. He reached for my hand and squeezed it. He said if he was still hung up on Mia, he would have used the fight as an excuse to run. I squeezed back and felt something loosen in my chest. Katie McNeil from my job search network called me 2 days later about an interview at her company. She said they needed someone to start in 3 weeks, and she immediately thought of me. I spent the next week preparing, researching the company, practicing answers to interview questions. Luke and I barely saw each other except for quick texts. He sent me good luck messages and offered to help me practice, but I was too stressed to make time. On Wednesday, he asked if I wanted to get dinner, and I said I needed to prep more. Thursday, he suggested coffee, and I said I was meeting with Katie to go over interview tips. By Friday, I realized we hadn't seen each other in 6 days. When we finally met up Saturday afternoon, something felt different. The distance had taken the pressure off. We got coffee and walked around downtown without the weight of our fight hanging over us. He asked about the interview and actually listened instead of checking his phone. I asked about his week, and he told me about a project at work that was driving him crazy. We laughed about stupid things like the guy at the coffee shop who couldn't work the espresso machine. It felt normal in a way it hadn't before. The interview was Tuesday morning at 9. I wore the blazer Mia let me borrow and showed up 15 minutes early. Katie met me in the lobby and walked me through the office. The interview lasted an hour, and I left feeling like I'd actually done well for once. Katie texted me that afternoon saying the hiring manager loved me. 3 days later, they offered me the job. I called Luke immediately, and he said we had to celebrate. He picked me up Friday night and took me to this Italian place near his apartment. We ordered wine even though it was overpriced, and he made me tell him every detail of the interview. Then he started talking about growing up in Oregon with his 2 brothers. He told me about the time they tried to build a treehouse and his youngest brother fell and broke his arm. He told me about his mom teaching him to cook because his dad couldn't boil water. I realized I was learning things about him that had nothing to do with Mia. I wasn't thinking about manipulation or guilt or whether I deserved to be there. I was just sitting across from him laughing at his stories and wanting to know more. When he walked me to my door later, I kissed him and felt like I was falling for the real person, not the idea I'd built up in my head. Mia announced at breakfast 2 weeks later that Isla was moving in. She was practically bouncing in her chair talking about how they'd been dating 4 months, and it felt right. Then she looked at me and said I'd need to find my own place in 2 months. My coffee mug stopped halfway to my mouth. She kept talking about how excited she was, but I couldn't hear her over the panic in my head. Living with Mia had been my safety net since graduation. I had a job now, but finding an apartment and living alone felt terrifying. Mia noticed my face and asked if I was okay. I said I was happy for her and excused myself to my room. Luke called an hour later because Mia had texted him worried about me. I told him I was freaking out about finding a place. He suggested we look at apartments near each other so we could hang out without the pressure of moving in together. The idea made sense and calmed me down enough to start looking at listings online. I spent the next week touring apartments after work. Most of them were too expensive or too far from my new job. On Thursday, I walked into a building near Luke's neighborhood and ran into someone in the lobby. He said my name, and I looked up to see Liam Bowers, Luke's coworker. He was holding his gym bag and asked what I was doing there. I explained I was apartment hunting. He said he lived on the 3rd floor and the building was great. We rode the elevator together and he asked how Luke was doing. I said he was good. Liam smiled and said Luke seemed way happier lately. Then he added that it was good to see because Luke used to talk about Mia constantly at work. My stomach dropped. Liam kept talking about how Luke would come in every Monday with stories about hanging out with her over the weekend. He said everyone at the office knew Luke was in love with her. The elevator doors opened and Liam said goodbye. I walked to the apartment viewing but couldn't focus on anything. The confirmation that Luke's feelings for Mia were real and deep made me spiral. I kept wondering if I was just the available option now that she was seriously dating someone. I showed up at Luke's apartment that night without calling first. He opened the door in sweatpants, looking surprised. I asked if I could come in. He stepped aside and I walked to his living room. I turned around and asked if he was really over Mia or